Hello, everyone, and welcome yet again to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you, as always, by the GSMC Sports Network. My name, as always, is Christopher Shepard. Thank you guys yet again for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed yesterday's show, no matter how shaky it was. I'm sorry about that. A couple of technical issues, but no matter. We go again today on a lovely Tuesday morning here on the East Coast for me. And we are going to have a fantastic show. We are going to be recapping the title-clinching Game 5 between the Boston Celtics and the Dallas Mavericks. We're going to talk about the championship performances, both in real life and in fantasy. We are going to be previewing the Panthers-Oilers Game 5, another potential clinching situation in that Stanley Cup final. Then we'll be going to the fantasy football realm. I know you guys have been anxiously anticipating for this show to turn towards fantasy football, and here we are today, and I'm going to have two segments for you guys where I'll be going over who I believe will be my running back breakout stars for the next campaign, and then also giving you guys kind of an injury report and update on some of the sport's biggest stars in terms of fantasy as well. And then last but not least, we will conclude today's show with our last Euros fantasy team preview, and it is my personal dark horse we'll be talking about in the Danes of Denmark. It should be a fantastic show ahead. But before we begin, I do ask that you like, follow, and subscribe to today's show. We do receive a lot of tips and donations as well, so if you do feel so inclined, please leave them at the link gsmc.cloud. Anything you leave is greatly appreciated. Also, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns about something I might have said in a previous episode, everything will be answered at the beginning of the next episode. So thank you guys in advance for what you do for the network, me and my fellow podcasters. Now, let's get right into today's show. Let's start off with the big news of the day. The Boston Celtics, ladies and gentlemen, are your 2024 NBA champions in a fantastic 106-88 win that perfectly exemplified Celtics basketball to a T. Complete team basketball. But let's just get into the fantasy stats right away. Our finals MVP, Jaylen Brown, putting up in what could be considered a pedestrian performance by a finals MVP, but still a very integral one. 21, 8, and 6 stat line, 42.6 fantasy points on the night if you are still playing daily fantasy at this point in the season. And JT as well dispelled any notions that he's a terrible fantasy player with the best fantasy performance in this game and potentially of this entire series. With the 31, 8, and 11 performance in terms of his stat line and 59.1 fantasy points. In the Mavericks side of things, they just looked tired, they looked gassed. Neither Luka nor Kyrie, even though Luka still had a high point production, looked to be fit enough to put up any sort of fight. Luka still had 28, 12, and 5 for 48.9 fantasy points, with a big disappointment on the day in Kyrie's return to Boston, where he just seems to be very cursed in a sense. 15, 3, and 9 stat line, 33.1 fantasy points, and that's just the name of the game right there. A team is more well constructed to beat superstars, and that was just what happened for today's game. And I just feel as if the Boston Celtics let all unease go to rest from Game 4. They knew that they wanted to win it tonight for their fans so that Boston could hang number banner 18 in the TD Garden rafters on a night where 17 years ago on that date, the 2008 Celtics won their 17th banner as well. And so it just felt like it was bound to happen, you know. This Boston Celtics team is just so special. You can talk about the fact that Jaylen Brown may not have had the best finals MVP performance of all time. You may still talk about Jason Tatum not having the best shooting efficiency in this series as well. You can talk about how Derek White and Drew Holiday, yes, they're fantastic on-ball defenders, but they still only provide three-point production or what have you. You can talk about, the Celtics had an easy road to the Eastern Conference. The fact of the matter is, they beat what was in front of them, and they beat them in an efficient manner that spoke to their unselfish style of basketball. And I think that's the main factor in what pundits will have to look at in the future. I've just read an article this morning on ESPN by Mike Lowe, who kind of dissected how we should view the Celtics team. And in terms of statistical point margins, the Celtics are right up there with some of the best, not just in recent years, but in history as well. They had a fantastic point differential both in the regular season, over 11, and in the postseason where they were plus 8, and had they not been blown out by 38 in Game 4, it would have been over plus 10. So as you can see, the Boston Celtics do have that sort of efficient ruthlessness that teams of the past have had in order to get there. When you think about recent memory, you think about teams like the 2012-13 Spurs, the 13-14 Heat, the early periods of the Shaq and Kobe Lakers in the late 90s to early thousands. Then you can go back and say, well, if we look at the 1986 Celtics, they compare really well in terms of stats, but the big question mark surrounding this 23-24 iteration of the Boston Celtics is the fact that they don't really have a superstar. In fact, I don't believe Jaylen Brown really cared that he won Finals MVP due to the fact that he just got to do it with his brothers, with his teammates. He said as much in his acceptance speech. And so I just feel as if the Boston Celtics, no matter how you view them, don't really care what people have to say about them at this current juncture. They are worried more or less about banner number 19. They're not necessarily worried about the here and now. Yes, they're going to celebrate, they're going to party hard, they earned this, they deserved it for their work throughout the season. But their mindset isn't just on winning one. They're finally over the mountain, what's next? Now, I know that the Eastern Conference will get more daunting, obviously. You had injuries to some big stars on the other side of the bracket where Giannis wasn't fully healthy in that round 1 series against Indiana. Joel Embiid wasn't healthy for much of the New York Knicks series, and so it could have been a different story, could have been a much more competitive path to the NBA Finals than the Boston Celtics might have expected. But it is what it is. What happened, and you can't dispute the fact that Boston didn't have its own centripetal force injured for most of that postseason run. And Kristaps Porzingis, who definitely adds some offensive prowess, because without him, for many portions of this series, in the non-Porzingis minutes, they did look a bit worse for wear, and Dallas was able to take advantage of that. So you must say that being able to win this title, especially without one of the most vital acquisitions of the past off season, really makes this title that much more special. And so congratulations to the Boston Celtics. Congratulations to both Jays for proving that they can follow through together, can be both real life and fantasy performers, can coexist with each other and with their teammates. Congratulations to Drew Holiday for really proving Brad Stevens right in terms of going out and acquiring him, taking a risk on him in favor of a guy in Marcus Smart who was such a cult legend for the Celtics in the past. So kudos to Drew Holiday for showing that in this finals. One of the better performances by a Celtic in Game 3 in this final series. And kudos to Derek White for just being one of those everyman kind of players, stepping up both on the offensive and defensive side of the ball. And congratulations to Kristaps Porzingis. I know it sounds weird saying that about a player who hasn't played as much in these series, but still, his presence alone really contributed to how Boston played in this finals. When he was on the court, the whole team just felt rejuvenated because they had one of their brothers with them. Kristaps Porzingis, congratulations to you, my friend. And just congratulations to a coaching staff and front office that didn't get a single thing wrong when constructing this team. I know Wyc Grousbeck, in picking guys like Brown, and especially Jaylen Brown, getting a lot of criticism from the Boston fan base for picking a guy in Brown, but he really believed in him. There were so many trade rumors surrounding Jaylen Brown in the early years of his career, in the Irving, Gordon, Hayward period when Boston was trying to really build a super team, and there was so many discussion about who would have to go, and Jaylen Brown constantly came up in Wyc Grousbeck, reassuring his team that we're not breaking you guys up, and sticking with it. Kudos to Brad Stevens, one of the best off seasons for any front office executive in recent memory. Going out, saying that Marcus Smart, hey, he was a fantastic part of the Celtics' dominance in the Eastern Conference for so many years. He was a huge part of why we're here. But now we have to really build for a championship level. And so that him going out and getting two fantastic studs in Jrue Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis, adding both drive offensively and a fantastic on-ball guard defender to this rotation, really showed that the Boston Celtics were all in for this year. So kudos to Brad Stevens, and last but not least, congratulations to Joe Mazzulla, proving that his philosophies, his style of play, a huge jiu-jitsu and MMA fan, huge motivator for this team, just a rock, a steady rock and presence in the locker room for the Boston Celtics to rely upon. Just goes to show that when you build a team and you're trying to find a coach, you definitely need a guy who can connect with his players. And his youth, his exuberance, and his toughness, and his ability to outmatch opposition, his genius in inventing an offense that is so unselfish, utilizes so many different skills so well, gets them all playing as a collective unit. Kudos to Joe Mazzulla for doing that. And congratulations to the Boston Celtics and the city of Boston for getting over the hump. Congratulations, party hard, but remember, the mission is not over. Banner 19 lies in wait, and we will be there to follow them forever and ever until they get that banner. That will just about do it for this segment. Congratulations yet again to the Boston Celtics, but we have to move on to the hockey side of things. This could potentially be the last time I say that. I continue saying that series continue to get extended. It's all bonkers in the fantasy realm for these two sports as they wind down their seasons. We are going to preview Game 5 of the Panthers and Oilers in the next segment of the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. Stick around for that one.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world?
Hello everyone and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. I hope you guys really enjoyed the last kind of final-centric daily fantasy basketball report. It has been a true honor to get to present to you these different series, these different players stepping up in the postseason in terms of fantasy. So I'm just happy now that the season has ended and my Boston Celtics are NBA champions. Looking ahead to the fantasy basketball campaign for next year, it should be a fantastic one. But for now, let's switch to hockey. But before we do that, I want to remind you yet again to consider leaving a tip or donation at the link gsmc.cloud. It is greatly appreciated. Huge support to the network, both me and my fellow podcasters, so do consider that. Without further ado, let's jump right into potentially the last transition between basketball and hockey we have on the show. For quite some time, we are previewing the Stanley Cup Finals Game 5 between the Florida Panthers and the Edmonton Oilers after the Edmonton Oilers shockingly extended this series in a complete and utter demolition of the Florida Panthers at home in Edmonton. But now the series goes back to Florida, and that's what really concerns me. But before we get into my concerns, let's look at what Daily Fantasy is projecting for this game. Obviously, the top price man is Connor McDavid after a stellar performance in Game 4, sitting at 11.4K in Daily Fantasy, projected to have 17.9 fantasy points, a lofty standard for one of the best players in the world. In terms of the Florida Panthers, they just need their players to bounce back, and so I'm just going to give you guys two of my bounce back candidates for the Florida Panthers here. In Sam Bennett, 7.4K valuation, 11 fantasy points projected for him. And then Anton Lundell had a great Game 3, kind of a lower level center, lower line center, 5.2K for him. And then he's projected to have 6.9 fantasy points, so kind of a little nice utility option to consider for tonight. And then in terms of Edmonton, how about Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, one of the longest tenured Edmonton Oilers on the squad, 7.6K valuation, 7.2. Look for him to really combine with Connor McDavid and want to get off on the right foot as the series shifts back to Florida. Now let's talk about that series shift, because it's a huge one. I mentioned before in previous episodes how the distance between these two teams, no matter how much they try to keep their upbeat mood, that distance sometimes creates a mental barrier. I know they try to overcome it by bonding on the plane rides over, playing games with each other. I know the Oilers have always talked about what games they play, but games don't matter when you're in the Stanley Cup Finals. Fatigue and mental fatigue definitely matter. And when you're playing in such a high-pressure situation where the stakes are so high, especially for the Edmonton Oilers as they head back to Florida, it really takes a toll on you. And we'll have to see how the Oilers come out in this Game 5 because of the fact they built a lot of momentum coming over from Game 3 to Game 4, where they utterly dominated for the first time in this series. But now they're out of that home atmosphere, that home mindset. They are back in a Florida atmosphere that really wants Florida to finish it off in 5, get it over with, win the first Stanley Cup in franchise history. And the Edmonton Oilers need to overcome whatever barrier they have put in their minds between themselves and travel and just get over the hump, try to extend the series for as long as possible. Now, another question that comes to mind is, should the Florida Panthers win this game, but Connor McDavid performs well? Does Connor McDavid win the Conn Smythe Trophy? He has inarguably been the best player not only on the Edmonton Oilers this postseason, but also in recent history, one of the best performances by a player in the Stanley Cup Finals. Now, speaking to all the records he's broken, he is the leading Edmonton Oilers point scorer. He broke, like I said, Wayne Gretzky's previous record for most assists in a single postseason, and he's just continuing to show up. He ranks 6th all-time of the all-time postseason scoring list. Just an outstanding, incredible performance from him for these Oilers to get to this point. His mindset really pushed them over the edge. And so, the big question for me is, does Connor McDavid, if he does win the Conn Smythe MVP trophy, vault himself into the status of players who can't get over the hump? Now, obviously, his championship window is extending now that the Oilers have gotten to this point, and I can see them not going anywhere for the next couple of years should they retain most of the core around McDavid and Draisaitl. So I'm really intrigued to see how voters view Connor McDavid's level of performance, especially in these past couple of games in the finals. Obviously, he didn't get off to a good start in the first couple of games, but in Edmonton, he did hit the ground running and got back to his best form. So how voters view this performance by Connor McDavid if he should lose. It has happened before. Most recent example of a player in a losing effort being dominated kind of in the finals was Reggie Leach of the Boston Bruins when they got swept by the Montreal Canadiens in '76. Reggie Leach still had a fantastic point production, over 20 points, most of them coming in the semifinals. So it kind of goes to show that voters will kind of consider that, but in order for them to consider that, Connor McDavid will really have to have a stellar performance. In terms of the Florida Panthers side of things, especially when it comes to Conn Smythe voting, I now think it is Alexander Barkov's to lose. As the leader of this team, as one of the captains of this team, if Alexander Barkov has a fantastic game, if he even scores like late in the game to clinch the series for Florida, I think that it is his to lose. Mainly due to the fact that Sergei Bobrovsky did have a very down game, got pulled early on in that game 4. So I do think that Alexander Barkov, it is his for the taking. And in order for Sergei Bobrovsky to overcome that, he's going to have at least a shutout performance. Because right now, what we're looking at is if he does win the Conn Smythe MVP, we'll have the worst goals against average by a goalie in a postseason winning the Conn Smythe since an Edmonton goalie in the early 90s. So, Sergei Bobrovsky, in my mind's eye, he could definitely win it. I think he definitely has the record. He's had the performances to prove it. He has really been one of the catalysts as to why, the reasons as to why this Florida team has gotten to this point. The reason why they have really overcome so many obstacles to get here is because of Sergei Bobrovsky, them relying on Sergei Bobrovsky in tough times to get them over the hump. And so, I really feel as if, should Florida clinch it tonight, it's a two-man race, but I'm giving the favorite to this Alexander Barkov captain because of his leadership characteristics in big moments on the stretch. Should he have a big Game 5, I'm looking for him to win the Conn Smythe. But it could change, as always. Even if Edmonton wins, I think McDavid suddenly gets vaulted up. But that should just about do it for the Conn Smythe talk here. Let's transition to the betting odds for tonight's game. So the total sits at 5.5, as always, when it comes to hockey. Edmonton is at plus 115, and Florida is at minus 135. So as you can see, yes, it has shifted to Florida as the series goes back to Florida, and they have home ice advantage now. But it hasn't shifted as much as is expected because of the Edmonton Oilers' utter dominance, and bookmakings are realizing that at this moment in time. And so I'm really split on how to view this game. I do think Florida does have the slight advantage in that Edmonton doesn't seem to get over mental fatigue in terms of travel. I think the fact that they were going to Edmonton really allowed them to rest easy, but going back to Florida, especially down 3-1 when they could have been at 2-2, I really will think will settle into their minds and they'll come out a little bit anxious to get going. And so that is why I slightly favor Florida and would pick Florida. In terms of over-under in this game, I think that it will be high scoring. I think that there will be goals. I think those two teams will go back and forth. Edmonton will want to expound every ounce of energy, much like the Dallas Mavericks did to win Game 4 in their NBA Finals series. But Edmonton really needs to prove that that game was not a fluke. Obviously, they have shown in recent memory to, after losing 3 or more games, to have these long streaks where they win the X amount of games and they'll just continue being the streaky team that loses some games and then goes on these long streaks. So they're going to have to prove that again. And I wouldn't put it past them, but right now it just feels like Florida's time. They're in Florida for this game. That's a huge factor for them. I think that they're going to wipe that Game 4 disaster from their minds and just come out swinging. And so I think that by tonight's end, the Florida Panthers will be hoisting the Stanley Cup trophy for the first time in their franchise history. But that will just about do it for this segment. If this is the last one, it's been a bittersweet ride, guys. Hopefully, maybe Edmonton can extend the series and I get one more fantasy preview or recap segment to do with you guys. But if this is it, it is what it is, and it's been a fantastic fantasy hockey season. I've been so glad to be a part of it with you guys. But coming up next, the moment you've all been waiting for, the seismic shift to the fantasy football realm. I'm going to discuss my fantasy running back breakout stars for next season. You don't want to miss it. We'll be right back to continue this edition of the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. Hope you guys enjoyed what could be the last time I ever have that transition between basketball and hockey ever again. But no matter, we are getting into fantasy football season now. This is the football season. The NFL season is fast approaching. So we are going to be hot and heavy with different segments. But for today, we have two special segments where I'll be discussing first my fantasy running back breakout stars. Now, this is an exciting crop of players that I have assembled for you guys. Guys who are in new systems, are in their sophomore seasons at different teams, or guys who just are willing to break out no matter what. So without further ado, let's jump right into this segment. I'm really thrilled to be able to get into fantasy football talk because I know that's what most of you guys want to hear from here on out. So let's get right into it. Now, nope, wrong segment. Sorry about that, guys. Now, this list of players that I've assembled for you guys today are some of my favorite running backs in the league, mainly due to this kind of youthfulness and excitement surrounding them, seeing as to how they're all in systems that really fit them well. Whether it be guys who are getting a new head coaching change, guys that are on new teams, or guys that are wanting to step up and be the huge force that their teams need them to be. I really think that this is a great list. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Starting off with one of the most talked about running backs in the league, mainly due to the fact that his former coach, Arthur Smith, definitely disrespected him as he shows up on my screen, Mr. Bijan Robinson. Now, by no means did he have a terrible season last year. He had 976 rushing yards, and that ranked 15th in the league. 58 receptions for all you PPR heads out there. 8 touchdowns. He averaged 14.5 fantasy points, which ranked 17th amongst all running backs. So not a terrible overall season for Mr. Robinson. But the big question about him was his usage rate. He just was so underutilized. He ranked 31st in usage rate in this past season. And so now that the Falcons have switched over to Raheem Morris, and he's come out and said that Bijan Robinson will get his share of touches in this new-look Falcons offense. Obviously, they bring in Kirk Cousins. They still have Drake London and Kyle Pitts who are wanting to break out. So it certainly feels like a page is going to be turned in terms of how the Atlanta Falcons offense is going to look. And I'm really excited and intrigued to see how Bijan Robinson will become a part of that. He is one of those top 5 running backs in leagues. He's definitely not a streamer option. He is going to be a number 1 option for your fantasy football team next season. So Bijan Robinson starts off this list with a bang. Hopefully Raheem Morris keeps his promise to him. Coming up next on this list is a guy who moves to a team that I really believe can be able to utilize his skills in Zach Moss. Now, Zach Moss has had an interesting career, moved around a lot with the Bills. Now he is going to the Cincinnati Bengals, where they don't necessarily have a set running back. They lose Joe Mixon to the Houston Texans. And so I really feel as if Zach Moss will have a nice little run out here for the Cincinnati Bengals. He's not necessarily competing as much with other players. And last year, he had a career highs in rushing yards, receptions and TDs, and fantasy points at 12.1. So I don't necessarily think he's a top 10 running back. In my opinion, he'll have to reach that height. We'll see how he shares time with Chase Brown and Sam J. Pirine. But ultimately, I think that Zach Moss could be a nice little option for you. And so I'm excited to see what he does in the Cincinnati Bengals offense that is looking to be very potent this season. Coming up next on this list is a guy who had a breakout campaign last year in a new home in DeAndre Swift. Obviously, Never really got it going with the Lions, had some decent up and down seasons with them, but he never truly had a breakout campaign for them. And so moved to the Philadelphia Eagles last year. Obviously, now that Saquon Barkley comes in, we'll see if his touches decrease this season, because Saquon definitely is a very intriguing addition to that running back room. But last year in Philly, he had 1,049 rushing yards. He had 5 games with at least 130-plus rushing yards in the last 3 seasons as well. Very interesting stat for him. And last year, the most important part about his season was he was healthy. He had a couple injury concerns with the Lions in his career, but he proved with the Philadelphia Eagles that when he remains healthy, he is one of the preeminent running backs in this league. Look for him in like the mid-second round, early third round range is where I believe that DeAndre Swift could fall. So DeAndre Swift is going to be one of those guys to look out for should you wish to roster a guy who really has his career revitalized moving to Philly. And like I said, we'll have to see what the Saquon deal is and the tush-push situation too. But last but not least, in terms of guys who I have the stats on for and are capable of breaking out, Javonte Williams. Javonte Williams always seems like he should be one of the most prominent running backs in this league. He had some fantastic seasons for the Broncos, even as they failed to find consistency team-wise. But Javonte Williams has always been a steady presence in that Denver Broncos offense. Last year, he had 903 rushing yards, 40 receptions, 7 TDs. As a rookie, actually, in 2021. And then, this past couple of seasons, things kind of fell apart for him. He had to compete with guys like Jaleel McLaughlin. They drafted Audric Estime, who I'm really excited about to see in that Denver Broncos system. And so, Javonte Williams seems like the least safest bet amongst this group of players, where you know his highs are high, but his lows are certainly lower than what we've seen from guys I've mentioned before. And so, Javonte Williams just needs to prove himself. I think he can be a solid RB 10 to 12 to even maybe 15 range if you're confident in taking him. But ultimately, I can't say he's at the levels of guys like DeAndre Swift, Bijan Robinson, or even Zach Moss. But I'm glad to see him on this list because I know what he's capable of, and we've seen flashes of what he's capable of. And maybe in a new system where the restrictions surrounding the whole Sean Payton, Russell Wilson situation goes away, and now he has a new quarterback, a rookie quarterback in Bo Nix, so maybe Sean Payton trusts him more. So we'll have to see. But guys who I just wanted to mention, not necessarily stat-wise, but who I believe will have to maintain their levels of production throughout the season, are 2 guys who are in their sophomore year and rookie season respectively. And one is actually coming off an injury, the rookie, who I think will really step up. And those are Tyjae Spears and Jonathan Brooks respectively. Tyjae Spears is an interesting one to watch because in a Tennessee Titans backfield that just lost Derrick Henry and now has Will Levis manning the QB position, Tyjae Spears, I think his touches will go exponentially upwards should Will Levis struggle to be a high-caliber starter for the Tennessee Titans. Obviously, they have done everything they can to really support Will Levis. They've got him a new coach in Brian Callahan, new weapons in Calvin Ridley and DeAndre Hopkins, but I do feel as if they still maintain that run-first philosophy in Tennessee. I don't think losing Derrick Henry necessarily forces your hand in terms of what you want to run through your running field. And so, I feel as if Tyjae Spears is getting a little underestimated. He's not necessarily ranked as high as some of these other guys on this list, but I do expect him to have a breakout season just based off his situation and where he is. Another guy, like I said, coming off an injury as a rookie, who I really believe can really help a struggling team, one of the worst teams in the league, is Jonathan Brooks. When he comes back from his torn ACL he suffered late on in his career at Texas, he is going to be someone to watch, especially for a Carolina Panthers team that will try and find ways to produce offense in whatever way they can. Fantastic season last year at the University of Texas for Jonathan Brooks. One of the reasons why he was seen as one of the number 1 running backs in that draft. Over 1,000 yards. Really special player. his contact balance, his ability to create yards after contact. I think that really will bode well for him in a Carolina Panthers team that's really trying to find the weapons on offense. Obviously, Bryce Young needs a running back mate in the backfield to kind of rely upon as he kind of tries to figure out opposing defenses. Obviously, the receiving core, the less we say about that, the better. So, look for Jonathan Brooks to maybe be a steal. Maybe in a super flex league, I'm not sure about a one running back league, but we'll have to see. That will just about do it for this segment of today's show. I hope you liked this fantasy football segment because we are going to get even more into the fantasy football realm in the coming weeks. And especially in the next segment where I'll be giving you guys a little injury update for the fantasy football season for 24 to 25. You don't want to miss it on this edition of the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. We'll be right back with that one.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere.
Hello everyone and welcome back to this edition of the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. Hope you liked that fantasy football segment because we have one more for you on today's show. I'll be giving you guys kind of a interesting look at some of the injuries that might impact your decisions in terms of your fantasy football team, rather. So without further ado, let's get into those injuries. Now, I feel as if some of these injuries are going to be less impactful than people think, and maybe even more impactful than people think. It's definitely debatable how you view what we hear surrounding these certain injuries, especially at the quarterback position. In terms of other positions, maybe you're a little less worried about them, but especially in the quarterback position, I think you really have to pay attention to and be wary of this whole information surrounding certain quarterbacks. And let's start off with the main one in Aaron Rodgers. Obviously, 4 snaps and a pop is what we call his injury. Did not necessarily get off to the best start for the New York Jets, tearing his Achilles 4 snaps into the season on a very emotional night. So, the story surrounding him, obviously, we know that he has not attended mandatory minicamp. It's very vague, though. He has gone through his rehab program. He's participating in restricted drills. So, there is a level of concern there, seeing as to how he's kind of apathetic as to how the team wants to build around him. Obviously, they want to have that exciting offense with pieces like Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall. But it all depends on Aaron Rodgers. And, that decision to not attend mandatory minicamp could loom large. I'm not looking that much into it. I'm not buying into that whole aura surrounding him not being there. But I do think that there are good signs that he wants to participate in whatever way he can. I think that right now, especially at his age and his level of health perhaps declining in recent years, I do think it will help him to slowly ease his way back into team drills and eventually getting into training camp where he could be at his most fit. So look for Aaron Rodgers' progress to slowly incline as the weeks go on. I'm not necessarily too worried about him at the current moment. And it is what it is with Aaron Rodgers not attending mandatory minicamp. He's been to so many before, so it is what it is. Jets fans, I wouldn't be too worried about him. On the other hand, you have a guy in Kirk Cousins who's also getting up there in age, moving to a different scheme and a different team where a lot is expected of him because this is the best quarterback they've had in recent years, and he's coming off one of the most worrying injuries he's had in his career, tearing his Achilles early on in the season last year when he was still a Minnesota Viking. And so the thing with Cousins is his progress does seem smooth, obviously. Kirk Cousins prides himself on health, much like Aaron Rodgers. He prides himself on maintaining his body, conditioning himself to be the best he can be, and that is why he's had such longevity, and that is why that Achilles injury was such a very strange, interesting, weird injury to happen to a guy like Kirk Cousins, because he is one of the most healthy quarterbacks in the league, and he prides himself on that. But so far, his progress is smooth, which is fantastic for the Atlanta Falcons to hear. Obviously, that kind of paves the way in an interesting way for Michael Penix to get some reps in the first team, should Kirk not play in that aspect of training. But he does seem to have this kind of health to him. He's looking good again. He's on the field. He's practicing. However, one thing that is notable about his injury is the fact that it was an injury to his back leg, the one where he is launching most of his torque when he throws to get that deep ball there. So that is something to watch. So look for Kirk Cousins early on in the season to not necessarily push the ball down the field as much as he likes. Obviously, when we saw him in Minnesota, he had a deep ball weapon in Justin Jefferson that no matter what always seemed to come down with so many contested catches. That might not be the case in Atlanta, where he has to get worked into a new system with players who are still developing. Obviously, guys like Drake London hasn't had a 1,000-yard season yet. Kyle Pitts is looking to get going. So it could affect his style of play. He obviously does want to push towards the middle of the field. He's kind of more of a short to intermediate route runner in my mind when I think of Kirk Cousins. But look for him early on to kind of ease up on that back leg. So those are the main two quarterbacks. Now, the other one is Daniel Jones. I don't have much information about Daniel Jones just yet. Obviously, he had a whole deal with his ACL, neck, what have you, and he really kind of did not get off on the right foot last season. But progress seems to be going well for him. I'm hearing a lot of good things from him as he gets back 7-on-7 drills, what have you, team drills. His progress, as well as Rodgers and Kirk's, is seemingly smooth. I'm not too worried about Daniel Jones, mainly because he's not as big of a fantasy quarterback factor as the two guys in Rodgers and Kirk I've talked about. I don't view him as a high-end quarterback talent that I'm really going to take a risk on because of the fact that A, he is injury-prone, and B, he just hasn't produced at a high enough level to get the New York Giants over that mountaintop. And so it's going to be really interesting to see how the Giants handle Daniel Jones. Obviously, they put so much money into him, invested so much into his future, and so they really have to invest kind of in a reciprocated manner in Daniel Jones himself. And so their kind of utmost goal should be getting him to full health, but we'll have to monitor his situation more closely. Now let's kind of switch to skill position players, mainly guys who I'm not necessarily too concerned about, but could be nice little fantasy assets should their respective quarterbacks be able to play. And guy in TJ Hawkinson, who is always injury prone, but when he plays is one of the best tight ends in the league, in my humble opinion. And with the Minnesota Vikings, he's in a system where they're not really rushing him back. Obviously, they have guys who they rely upon in that system. And so there's honestly been a next man up mentality for the Minnesota Vikings. Obviously, now that they have a rookie quarterback instead of Kirk and J.J. McCarthy, they definitely want to get him integrated into their program as smoothly as possible. But it looks like T.J. Hawkinson won't be a major part of that. Coming from their camps, they are in no rush to bring him back, and he's going to be delayed for the start of the season. He might not even play week 1. And so make of that what you will, but I'm not necessarily worried about T.J. Hawkinson. Whenever he plays, it's a delight to watch. We take what we can with a guy like him, one of the more injury-prone tight ends in the league. And honestly, his production still might decline because of J.J. McCarthy being his QB. Maybe even Sam Darnold getting some snaps. So T.J. Hawkinson right now is not a concern. What might be a concern is Mike Williams. He is He will be 9 months post-op from his knee surgery. When he enters training camp, he's looking to start the year. Obviously, one of the bigger acquisitions for the New York Jets in the past year, and he wants to be a big part of this system. And so I think it is integral for the Jets to get Mike Williams integrated into their program. He might not get to play with Aaron Rodgers as much as he wants to, but I do believe that Mike Williams being in that system, playing with guys like Garrett Wilson and some other guys like Alan Lazard, will help him become one of Rodgers' go-to targets. I'm not necessarily think he will be the wide receiver 1, even on this New York Jets team. He might even be the wide receiver 4. We don't know. His health is a major part of what his status will be for the Jets early on in his Jet career. So, ultimately, I'm not looking too much into that. Now, as I go over this list as a whole, I think that maybe 1 or 2 guys are certain to be candidates that will be guys you want to look for in terms of your fantasy team. And that is Aaron Rodgers and then TJ Hawkinson, should he come back healthy to start week 1. So, the last time we saw Aaron Rodgers play a full season, he had over 3,500 yards and he had 26 touchdowns, and that's always been the point for people. People might have been angry that Aaron Rodgers was taken by the Jets, and they might be angered maybe because of his age, maybe he's not a win-now mindset, but the last time we saw him, he definitely proved he's still a fantastic real-life QB and in fantasy as well. And so, with that skill receiver core, I don't really care if he misses mandatory minicamp or not. He will want to hit the ground running and not get injured. That's his main goal, not get injured within the first 4 snaps of a season. Whereas in Hawkinson's terms, he's kind of a guy who is very hit or miss. Now, obviously, the tight end market is as high as it's ever been. There's so many high-end tight ends that have hit the scene, whether it be Sam Laporta looking to have a fantastic sophomore season, Travis Kelce, always fantastic partnership with Patrick Mahomes, Trey McBride even on a worse team in the Arizona Cardinals where he gets a lot of targets. Even a guy like Jake Ferguson, who's a huge red zone threat as a tight end. TJ Hawkinson, when he plays, falls into that top 10 in my humble opinion. His level of production for the Minnesota Vikings last year, carrying over to this year, could be a huge aspect as to how people view the Minnesota Vikings as a team, even because of the fact there's been so much change. They drafted J.J. McCarthy, and they want their offense to go, and T.J. Hawkinson's going to have to be a big part of that. I'm looking for his targets to be at an all-time high for next year, and I truly believe that when he's fit enough to see the field and see playing time, he will be a preeminent tight end. But that will just about do it for these past 2 fantasy football segments. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Coming up in this next segment, and in terms of next week, we'll be getting more hot and heavy with fantasy football. But coming up in this next segment for you guys, this is our last Euros fantasy team preview. My personal and truer dark horse in any of the past teams that I've done on this show, Denmark. I think Denmark is an exciting team that you guys don't want to miss. You could have a couple of steals, but we will be right back for this edition of the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. Hello everyone and welcome to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. We are in the home stretch of today's show, and for our final segment, we are going to conclude our Euros fantasy team previews with my personal dark horse, one of my favorite teams in this entire tournament, the Danes of Denmark. So without further ado, let us get right into this segment. And the reason I am so high on the Danes, unlike some people, is just due to the emotional investment this squad seems to have. 1,100 days before their first Euros game of this tournament, Christian Eriksen faced his life. He went into cardiac arrest on the pitch, and he had to be brought back to life. And it was a very, very emotional moment for Denmark fans everywhere. And just the fact that he was able to get on the pitch just a couple of short months later and just be himself again, one of the most creative footballers in the world, is such a true comeback story, a true underdog story that I just can't get past. And that's why I love this Denmark team. They are so invested in bolstering their squad through that emotionality, that grit and physicality that Christian Eriksen showed as he was fighting for his life, the 2020 Euros. And so that is why I respect them as a team. I really hope and pray that they go far now with Christian Eriksen back in the squad. And I truly believe that my underdogs can be your underdogs as well in terms of fantasy and in real life on the pitch. So let's just get into the fantasy players who I am looking at for this squad. Now, this may be a more new-look Denmark squad from the Euros. Obviously, they have played a game already. Kind of a weird draw against Slovenia, where their lineup may not have been what people expected to see of them. Not many of the players had starred for them in the 2020 Euros in that lineup. So, as you can see, there might be a bit of experimentation in that squad. But still, I want to highlight some players who I believe are going to be stars for you in your fantasy squad, starting off with the man himself, Christian Eriksen. At 7 million euros, I believe that he is going to be one of the best players at this tournament, should Denmark at least get out of the group stages. And so, just looking at his qualifying campaign for Denmark, 1 goal and 3 assists in qualifying, 3.5 key passes, so he's going to be pulling the strings like Geppetto in that midfield for the Danes. Just so glad to see him back. Obviously got a goal in his first game back in the international stage for Denmark since that harrowing moment. So just look for Christian Eriksen, now that he's back in this team, to just revitalize this squad, give them a new energy. Should they play more younger and experienced players, he is going to be the leader to rely upon. And so Christian Eriksen could be a fantastic addition to your Euros fantasy squad. I know I would want him in mine. Now let's look at the rest of their attack. Their attack is much younger than it has been in recent years. They've gone from Guy and Yusuf Palsson, who was just one of those reliable target men, to a young man in Rasmus Højlund, who, while struggled to get going domestically, had streaky games there domestically for Manchester United in his first full season with them. I think for Denmark, he is going to really shine. His just ability to move between the lines at pace, connect well with his midfield, understanding his partnership with Jonas Vind, who we'll talk about later in this segment, can really help. In qualifying, he showed his talent, his untapped potential with 7 goals and 1 assist. So look for Rasmus Højlund, if Denmark goes far, to contribute more and more to this team. I think he's going to have a little bit of growing pains growing into this tournament, but he could be one of the young stars to watch on the international stage, especially for a Denmark team that wants to build around their previous success in this tournament. Now, let's look at his running mate and partner, Jonas Vind, who is also an incredible young player. 11 goals and 1 assist for club this year. So just goes to show that Denmark really truly believe in this young partnership up top. They really believe that they can build off of the experienced midfield that they have behind them. So Jonas Vind also had a lovely assist for that Christian Eriksen goal, their first Euros goal of this tournament. So Jonas Wind just goes to show he's not all goals. He can score. He can assist. And I think that he could be a huge backup option for you off the bench for your Euros fantasy squad. Now let's transition more to their defense. Now the Danish defense does have a couple of steady hands on Andreas Christensen. But the guy who I'm really looking out for had a breakout Euros campaign. Shocked that he didn't get a big money move after that Euros. In Joachim Mæhle. He truly is one of those guys who can do everything for Denmark in that back line. At the left back position at $5.5 million. A bargain in my opinion. He had 2.8 ball recoveries per game in qualifying. So look for Joachim Mæhle to truly be one of those guys who's not just a force defensively, but in the past Euros, he really added to the Denmark attack, a huge part of crossing balls into the box, getting assists, really helping that young, experienced squad, sans Christian Eriksen, advance in that tournament. I'm looking for him to have a huge tournament, especially as we get into the knockout stages, should Denmark be there. I'm really thrilled that I get to mention Joachim Mæhle. He's one of my favorite breakout players of last tournament, and I wish him well in this one. Now let's look into more of bench options for this Denmark team, shall we? In Pierre-Emil Højbjerg. Now, Pierre-Emil Højbjerg is an interesting player because for the past couple of seasons with Spurs, people can say that he had been one of the best Premier League midfielders, and so now that he's in Ange's system, he kind of declined, not necessarily playing as much as he wants, kind of grumbles about a big money move for him. But in a Danish kit, I think that Pierre-Emil Højbjerg shines because he doesn't necessarily have to play with a bunch of pressure on his back. He knows he has Christian Eriksen to partner with, and he steps into more of that defensive midfielder role that best suits him. Recovering balls, progressing them to Christian Eriksen, kind of being the quarterback for this Denmark team, if you will, and kind of really pulling the strings from defense to the midfield. Just knowing that he can rest easy a little bit and not have to be one of the huge forces that he's been for Spurs over the past couple of years. And now that he's kind of wanted to transition to another team, I think that Pierre-Emil Højbjerg, the pressure's off him, and look for him to be one of those dominant defensive midfielders, not known for his goals or assists, but can bag a couple. So just keep him in mind as a nice little bench option. And last but not least, for Denmark, another guy who I really loved as a breakout player this last tournament, a guy who you should really look out for, especially in terms of long-range goals, his set-piece prowess, and just his ability to strike a ball so well, Mikkel Damsgaard. He did not start in that game against Slovenia, which kind of surprised me because of his abilities on the wing. Just a tricky player to defend, wins a lot of set pieces, takes them himself, and he does them well. He is so efficient on the ball and off the ball. I think that if he plays this tournament, he's going to be a fantastic player, maybe even a starter on your Euros fantasy team. Fantastic Euros last year, had a huge free kick goal to get them to the semifinals against England actually in the semifinals. And so look for Mikkel Damsgaard to be one of those guys who, should he play a lot of minutes for this Danish team that wants to kind of transition, I think Mikkel Damsgaard is going to be a star at this Euros. Now, in terms of where I think they'll get to in this tournament, I'm just really picking them for their emotional talent, their ability to harness their emotions no matter how down or up they're feeling, and take that with them into every single game and just play with the intensity and passion that they deserve. They are a more direct team. They don't necessarily have that level of creativity. They're more known for their IQs and well-roundedness, just knowing where everyone's going to be on the pitch, and that's why I love them so much. They build from the back well. They don't necessarily play enjoyable football, but they have fantastic moments in them. So I do believe that this can be a quarterfinals team at best. I think that they have a weird group that I think that they're going to progress from. But right now, I do believe that Denmark right now does not have enough talent to get back to the semifinals. I think that was an emotional roller coaster for them 4 years ago. And right now, while they do have the players, and they have a healthy Christian Eriksen, I just think that right now there are more teams rising around them that are falling, And so that's why I think that Denmark will only get to the quarterfinals, but they will have a nice run in them. And I truly wish the best for them, and for Christian Eriksen especially. But that should just about do it for this edition of the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. I hope you guys enjoyed this show. Hope you enjoyed the incorporation of fantasy football. It is going to be a fantasy football heavy week this coming week. But, as always, do remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the show. I've been Chris Shepard. This has been the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. We will be back tomorrow for another edition of the show, better than ever.